Last week, I showed you all how to make a basic overlay in Blender 3D, and I had a lot of fun with that. So this week, I figured I would expand on that and show you all how to make a different style of overlay using a completely different method, all still in Blender 3D, and we'll even animate it. My personal example came out something like this. And no need to waste time, so let's hop in. My name is Chris Folea, I'll be your stream professor. Welcome to StreamSchool. Okay, first things first, when we hop into Blender, I'm going to turn on screencast keys, so whenever I press something, you can see it in the lower left-hand corner. Now, let's get our file set up for success to make our really cool overlay. First things first, we're going to want to go to the camera tab right here, go down to film, and check the transparent box to make sure it renders out with a transparent background. Then we're going to want to go to color management and change the view transform from filmic to standard. That'll make it so whenever we select colors, we end up with the exact colors we picked rather than a flattened color curve filmic version of it. Then we're going to want to go to the printer because we're going to animate this, and we're going to want to change the frame rate to 60 frames per second because that is, in general, what most people are streaming at. Now, let's get the actual scene set up. We're going to want to go to the lower left-hand corner, click and drag to make a second panel here, hit 0 on the numpad. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my properties panel by hitting N, but then you'll notice we have all of these like lines and grids and 3D cursor and stuff. You can get rid of that by pressing the 2 overlapping circles here, then hold down Z, move your mouse over rendered and release, and now we have a fully rendered shaded view that we can constantly see as we work on our overlay. Now, what we're going to want to do is take the camera, select it, hit Alt-R to reset rotation, Alt-G to reset location, grab our movement widget and move it up just a little bit. The distance isn't really going to matter a whole lot because we're about to change it to orthographic right here under the camera settings to flatten everything out and make it like we're working in 2D essentially. Then we want to delete the light, delete the cube, and we are ready to get started. So hit Shift A to add mesh plane. Then we're going to want to scale this to be whatever general dimensions we want our overlay to be. So I'm going to scale mine up like this using the S key. Then I'm going to hit S and then X to scale on the X axis. And that looks about right to me because I'm also going to have a bar at the bottom of this that has metrics like most recent subscribers and donations and such. And I don't want it to be too wide or else it'll just look really awkward. So I'm gonna click to set my scale in there. Then I'm gonna hit Tab, and I'm going to hit I for inset. I'm gonna inset it just a teensy amount, and you're gonna notice that the sides are getting inset more than the top and the bottom. If I right click to not inset to cancel my action and hit Tab, the reason for that is because under item, you'll notice the scale is not uniformly 1. So if I hit Control A, I can now apply the scale to make sure all of those are 1. So now when I go back into edit mode and hit I for inset, you notice that the inset is more uniform now. So I'm going to inset this just a tiny amount like so. Then I'm going to Alt A to deselect everything, select these 4 vertices, and I'm going to scale them up past the camera bounds. Doesn't matter past that, really we just want to go past the camera bounds. So anything within the camera, we don't want any transparent borders here. Then we're gonna hit 3 to go to face select, or you can select this button right up here. And I'm gonna select the face and I'm going to inset it to whatever thickness we want our overlay border to be. We can adjust this later pretty easily, and we probably will, but I'm gonna set mine to this for now. Then I'm going to hold Alt and select this edge right here, and that will select the entire face loop. Then I'm going to hit delete and faces. So now if we tab out of this and go to just object mode, you'll notice we have a transparent border and everything else is solid, which is the exact opposite of what we want. So this is where we really set up how we're going to work with this overlay today. And we're going to go to the materials panel, hit new, and in the surface dropdown, instead of principled, you want to choose holdout. What that does is it makes it so, I'll just demonstrate. So if I add a plane now and scale it up, it makes it so anything behind the mesh is now invisible and anything in our cutout window is visible or opaque. So we can only see what's in the little cutout window. which is really cool. Now, picture what this means for our overlay. This means within the border of our overlay, we can put anything we want. We can put a gradient, we can put a picture. You can literally rickroll people with your overlay if you want to put a video of Rick Astley back there. I don't care, do whatever you want, but this is how we're going to construct our overlay today. We can put anything behind this. I'm going to keep it simple and make a gradient. So I'm going to scale my plane down using the S key again to match the border more or less. If we make it too big, the gradient's not going to look great. I'm going to click to apply that. Then I'm going to drag in the lower left-hand corner up, and we're going to bring up a materials panel or a shader editor. You notice there's nothing here right now. And this is about to get confusing for some of you, but just bear with me and trust me through this. So if I hit new on the materials, we now have two nodes. We have a principled BSDF and a material output BSDF. Now, we're working on a 2D overlay that's supposed to look sort of illustrated and flat, so I'm going to make this not shaded. I'm going to delete the principled BSDF, hit Shift A, add a shader, and we're going to add an emission shader. It's attached to the mouse until you click to set it down. Then you want to grab the green dot and drag it to the material output surface. So now we have this solid white border. Cool. But let's say we want this to be a gradient. I personally want my border to be a blue gradient. So I'm going to hit Shift A, texture, gradient texture, and plug the factor into the color. And you'll notice we have this nice black and white texture gradient going across it. Now I want mine to be from top to bottom, and that's pretty easy. We can just take our plane, rotate 90, which is the wrong direction. So I'm gonna right click to cancel that. So I'm gonna do rotate minus 90. And by that, I mean, I'm literally typing R on the keyboard for rotate and then minus 90 on the keyboard to set the degrees that I want to rotate it. I'm gonna hit enter to apply it. Now I have this gradient going top to bottom. We can scale it down a little bit more to match the border a little bit better. This is orthographic, so no matter where this is in 3D space, it's always gonna be flat relative to the border. But after that, we want this to be color. We don't want just a boring black and white gradient. So to do that, we're going to move this node using the G key, click to apply, hit Shift A, go to Converter and Color Ramp. And if we highlight over this line, you'll notice that it turns white. What that means is if we click it down now, it's going to automatically connect how we want it to. So it goes from factor to factor, then color to color. So if we drag these little sliders now, you'll notice we can manipulate this gradient however we want. And we can even add points if we really wanted to. We can add all sorts of points and make the ugliest rainbow gradient in the entire universe. But we're not going to do that. I'm just going to select these individual points and delete them now. I just want to make a nice blue gradient. So I'm going to make like a nice dark blue here, I think, and a nice light blue here. Something like that for mine. Again, you can make yours whatever you want. You don't even have to use a gradient. You could use an image texture or a logo back here, and that would be totally cool too. We're actually going to add some more details behind this frame in just a bit. But I'm more or less happy, I think, with this color scheme. Looks all right to me. I might increase the saturation a little bit if it's not already at the maximum. Cool. So I'm happy with this gradient, and we can mess with this all we want, but I'm happy with this. You all do what makes you happy. That's what's important. Or what matches your stream, even more importantly. Now, this is just a gradient frame, and it took a lot of effort to get here, but now we can do some cool things to this since we have this window. First of all, I want to make an outline on this. So for that, anything in front of the frame or above the frame in 3D space is going to be completely visible. Anything behind the frame is only going to be visible in the window cutout. So we want to add an outline, which before we add the outline, quick side note here, if you want yours to be a different shape than a rectangle, using the techniques we used in the previous tutorial, you can just add a bunch of edge loops to this and make the cutout whatever shape you want. So that's just a brief side note. You don't have to change the shape if you like the rectangle shape, but honestly, you can make this overlay any shape you want, and that is it'll work exactly the same. So I'm gonna undo all of these edge loops, but Let's add an outline. If we hit Tab to go into edit mode, go to Edge Select by clicking this button or hitting 2 on the keyboard. I'm going to select these 4 edges, which will select the entire face. Then I'm going to select these 4 edges right here. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate. Then I'm going to hit P to separate selection. That separates it into its own mesh. Then I'm going to hit Tab, hold down Z and go to Wireframe. And I'm going to just select the mesh that we just separated. Then if I hit Tab, go to Face Select, select the face, hit Delete, and do Only Faces. We go back to Edge Select, you'll notice we still have the edges left over, which is exactly what we want. So we're going to hit A on our keyboard to select all of the edges, hit E, and then to extrude, and then Z for the Z axis. And I'm going to extrude this up. You can extrude it as far up as you want. It won't make any difference whatsoever, but I'm just going to click when I'm happy with that, hit Tab to go out of edit mode, and now, go back to solid view, we have something like this. Still no outline rendering though. How we're going to do that is by going to the modifier properties, add modifier, solidify. And you'll notice now, if we apply a little bit of thickness, we have an outline. But the outline is the holdout material, which is why it's not visible. So if we go to the materials panel, hit the little 2 to make it its own material, then change the surface from holdout to emission. Now we have a nice white outline. If we go back to the modifier panel, you can change the thickness to however thick you want. And I think that looks pretty cool. But one other thing you'll notice is that the outline happens right at the bound, like it extrudes out. I want the outline to be centered on the edge of this box personally. So for that, I'm going to change the offset to 0. So now if we zoom in and go to wireframe, you can see that the outline is centered on the edge rather than on the outside of the edge, which is more a preference thing, but it's my preference. But then you can make this as thick as you want or as thin as you want. I'm gonna leave mine somewhere about here, I think. And now let's add like a little metrics box before we add some detail behind this. So for that, we're gonna need to change the shape of this a little bit. And you'll notice if we if we go to vertex select and we edit just this rectangle, then the outline doesn't follow it. Now Blender 2.8 has a brand new feature in it that is super nice, where you can select multiple objects and hit Tab to edit them at the same time. So we hit numpad 7 to go to the top view, go to wireframe, hit Alt-A to deselect everything, and then do B for box select and just select everything right here. That will select the outline and the holdout. Hit GY to move on the Y axis. We can move this up to make room for a little metrics. Cool. Then to get centered on these, I'm gonna hit 2 to go to edge select, or this button right here, hit Alt-A, Z, go to solid view, then I'm gonna select these 2 edges. I'm gonna hit Shift-S for cursor to selected, Tab, because the 3D cursor is where new objects spawn in. So this is not 100% necessary, but it's nice for it to spawn in the correct place. So now if I go back into object mode, hit Shift-A, Mesh, Plane, we have a plane here. Looks super ugly because it's not using the right material. So I'm going to go to the materials panel and add the white material. Then we're just going to use the scale command to scale it down until it's about where we want it, somewhere around there. Then I'm going to hit S and then X to scale it on the X-axis, like so. And if we really want this to match the border perfectly, there's a trick for that. You can see the little magnet up here. You can click the drop down next to it and select vertex. Now, if you select the magnet, it will automatically snap to everything without you pressing any additional keys. But that's really obnoxious, I find. So I don't check the magnet, it's personal preference, but if we go into edit mode, go to vertex select, and then select these 2 vertices, hit G and then X to move on the X axis. Then we hold Control, move our mouse up to this corner. You'll notice that it snaps perfectly in line with that corner, which is exactly what we want. Then we can do the exact same thing on this side. And now you have a box where you can put whatever metrics you want. You can put subscribers, donations, most recent followers, whatever. I like to do subscribers and donations, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a cutout on this rectangle to show that. The symbol for subscriber is a star, So I'm gonna hit Shift A to add a circle, and we're gonna go to the little prompt right here before we press anything else. We're gonna change the vertices to 10, because a star has 5 points, but if you count the concave points, it has 10 points. So if we hit Tab to go to edit mode, select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hit S on the keyboard, we can scale these down to make a nice star. Hit A to select them all, hit F to fill it in, Tab to go back to object mode, move it up, move it over. You can even scale it down, which is what we really want to do. Yeah, not you can scale it down, you kind of need to. Then you'll notice that this is gray and it doesn't match the background gradient. So we really want to cut this out of the plane. So I'm going to hit E for extrude to make a nice cutout here. Go back to object mode. Then I'm going to select the plane, go to the modifiers tab, add a boolean, and just select the circle. And then hit apply. Yeah, I guess I'll hit apply. And then we can delete the star, and now we have a nice cutout there. Then we can do the exact same thing for the $sign, but hit Shift A, text, hit Tab to modify the text and make it a $sign. If you want to change the font, you can go down to the text thing and go to the font drop down here and search your computer for the font that you want to use. But we're going to move this over, get it scaled all nice so it matches where we want. Like so. That looks pretty good to me. Then we're going to hit F3 to bring up the search menu and say convert to. Select convert to, click it, and then say mesh from curve / mesh / serve / text. Now this is a mesh instead of a text object. We can hit A, E for extrude, and extrude it straight through. Then we're going to do the exact same thing we just did. We're going to select the rectangle, add a boolean modifier, select the little highlighter, and select the text. Hit apply, delete the text. Now we have a nice cutout there too. Then the only thing we need to do is divide this down the center with a logo or something. So to do that, I'm going to do File, Import Images as Planes. That's not on by default, so if it's not on for you, go to Edit, Preferences, or Add-ons, type in the search bar and do Images as Planes and check it. But now that that's checked, I'm going to go to Import Images as Planes. I'm going to go to my folder, find it under Working. And I did the wrong thing, just like I did in the previous tutorial. I'm going to do import images as planes. I imported it as shaded and not as, not what I wanted. So anyway, go back to working, select it. Make sure you select emit right here, then do images as planes. And now you have your logo. Mine's a circle, so it's pretty easy to make an outline for if I want a nice white outline about it. So I'm just going to move it around. Y'all should know how to move stuff around by now for the most part, I think. But I'm going to hit Shift S to do cursor to selected. Then I'm going to move them up a little bit just to get some distance. Hit Shift A, mesh, circle. Right now you'll notice it's still only 10 points. We're going to change that to 64 to make it super smooth. Then we're going to hit Tab, F to fill it in with a face. Tab again, scale it down until it matches the width of our outline. Go to the materials and give it the outline material. Then adjust the width again. Cool. Now we are getting very close to done, but let's add some bubbles in the background just to really take advantage of this window cutout method. A lot of you probably haven't watched my stream, but the bubbles are kind of my aesthetic. So for that, all I'm gonna do is move my cursor back to the 0 position on the grid. So for that, I'm gonna go to View, just select these 3 boxes. If you just click the first one, hold, and drag down, you can select all of them at once. I'm gonna hit 0, and that'll zero out the cursor location. Then I'm gonna hit Shift A, Mesh, UV Sphere, and I'm going to do 64 by 32, again, just to make it super smooth. Then I'm gonna move it up, and we're gonna add a new material. Back to the node editor. So we're gonna delete the principled because we're gonna work with an emission, but we're gonna work with 2 shaders this time, or 3 shaders actually. I'm gonna hit Shift A, shader, emission to bring that out. Shift A, shader, transparent to bring that out. And now we need to mix the 2. And for that, we need a mix shader, which by the way, a transparent shader is just transparent. But we're gonna hit Shift A, shader, and we're gonna grab a mix shader, and we're gonna plug these 2 in. And you're gonna notice nothing happens because we haven't plugged into the material output, but this also doesn't look very transparent. If we drag it over the frame, yeah, not very transparent. That's because in Eevee, you have to tell a material that it can accept transparency. So under the material panel, we want to go to settings, and where it says blend mode opaque, change that to alpha blend. And then under shadow mode, change that to none, because we don't want this to cast shadows. Then we want these to be bubbles, not just opaque circles, because that's boring. But for that, I'm going to hit F3 to bring up the search menu, do shade smooth, and hit enter just to get rid of the faceted look. But then we're going to use something called the Fresnel effect, which is where, it's hard to explain, but essentially we want the emission at the edges and the transparency in the center of the circle. So this is the facing, we're going to use something, it's a facing ratio. So if it's facing away from the camera, it'll be opaque emission. If it's facing towards the camera, it'll be transparent, and everything in between is a gradient. So for that, we do Shift A, input layer weight, click that down. We're going to grab the facing ratio, plug that into the gray socket right here, and now you'll notice we have the exact opposite of what we want. So we could either switch these two shaders, or what we really want to do is add another gradient ramp, because that'll allow us to manipulate this and make it look exactly how we want. So I'm going to hit Shift A, and we will add a converter and a color ramp, snap it right over the line so it automatically connects. And we're going to move black to this end, white to this end. And that's looking cool. It's like a bubble. It's not quite the bubble we want, but we'll get there. Let's move the bubble back over here. And I'm going to select the holdout and hit H to hide it, just so we can see this in front of the blue better. I'm going to select the circle, and then I'm going to choose B-spline instead of linear. The difference is that B-spline is just a softer transition. It feels more natural to me. And then these being solid white like this feels very harsh. So to turn that down, black is the opaque part of our thing. So I'm just going to bring this up so it's more gray like that. Cool. Then we're going to move these around within the frame. And we're actually going to have to move these underneath the cutout as well, so they're not completely visible when we hit Alt-H to bring our frame back. But Alt-A to deselect everything, select the bubble, and you can hit Shift-D to duplicate and move it around, S to scale, and really just do that over and over again, or with whatever object you want. Or again, I want to reiterate, this is your overlay that you're creating. You don't want bubbles, that's not your aesthetic, you're not Oracle fish, you want something else, maybe stripes or squares or teapots or monkeys, I don't know. Put whatever you want behind the frame. I'm just showing you some options and some tools that you can use. The real most of the thing you're supposed to get out of this tutorial is this window frame method of a holdout. But we're adding some bubbles, and then I'm going to show you how to make it loop animated. So I'm going to duplicate this around until I'm happy with it. Okay, something like that. Doesn't look too bad. Maybe move this guy over here to the corner a little bit more. Yeah, that's not horrible. Maybe add a couple smaller bubbles. And if we had more time for the tutorial, we're already going way over time here, I would make a few layers of bubbles and do a parallax effect, but we don't have time for that. So I'm going to show you all just the basic animation of how to loop this. So we want these to animate up and loop. Let's say we want our animation to be 3 seconds. So 3 times 60 is, don't tell me it's 180. Took me a second there without my calculator. But we want the end frame to be 180, so this will be a 3-second animation at 60 frames per second. Then we want to duplicate one of these bubbles and just move it out of the way off frame, so we have something left over for later if we want to use it. But we're gonna take all of these bubbles, select all of them, holding Shift, then we're going to hit Control-J to join them into one object. Then we're going to duplicate this and move it down here. The reason for this is because if you want an animation to loop, the first frame has to be identical to one frame past the last frame. You don't want it to be identical to the exact last frame, because then if the first frame and the last frame are the exact same, it's going to look like it's hitching when it loops. It's going to look like it's lagging because it'll pause for a brief fraction of a second. So you don't want the last frame to be identical to the first frame, but you want it to be very close. So to accomplish this, we're going to actually make our animation 179 frames long, and we're going to animate to 180. But the easiest way to make this a loop is to insert a location keyframe for these bubbles, then select these bubbles and copy their location. So we can copy their X, which by the way, we really only need the Y location, so I'm going to copy the Y location. By the way, in Blender, if you hover over a box and it highlights like this, you can hit Control-C without actually selecting it. You do not have to select it and hit Control-C to copy the value. You can just highlight and hit Control-C, copy the value. So then we're going to go to frame 180, paste that value, right click, or just hover over again and hit I for insert. So now these bubbles animate into the place of those. But you're going to notice that they sort of start slow, get faster, and then slow down again. For this to be looping, we need it to be one continuous movement. Just trust me on this. But what we're going to do is go to our graph editor instead of shader editor. We're going to select one vertex of the green line, hit L to select the whole thing, right click, and say linear under interpolation mode. So now you'll notice it's just one continuous motion. However, the first bubbles aren't moving out of the way, so it's not looping yet. And how we're going to accomplish that is we're going to go to the first frame, make sure you are on the first frame for this, gonna select the bubbles, shift select the bubbles that are moving, hit Control P to bring up the parent menu and say set parent to object. So now these bubbles are attached to these bubbles, which is exactly what we want. So if we watch in this frame over here, completely hide all of this, watch. You won't be able to tell, it just perfectly, completely loops. Very cool. And after all this is said and done, we can adjust the frame size, we can adjust the outlines and stuff. This tutorial is already almost 30 minutes long, so I'm gonna get to the export process after I make a couple little tweaks here. I'm sorry, I'm taking more time. But I kind of want this border length to almost match this border length. So I'm gonna select the outline, select this, hit Tab, hit Alt-A to deselect everything, Z, go to wireframe, grab these vertices using box select, and then just scale this in a bit to even this out some. Ooh, I don't know, man. Maybe that was the wrong move. Just scale it in a little bit, then move these down a little bit. Then we can always adjust this height. Oh yeah, this is what we do. So we scale this height to match. Perfect. So now we play and we get the looping bubbles going on infinitely. So now that our overlay is done, which I realize this looks pretty basic. Normally you'd spend more than 30 minutes on an overlay. So be creative, guys. Do whatever you want. You can have like animated stripes. You can have like a white stripe going across it to look like a cool reflection or something. You can do anything you want. Just put it behind the window frame and it will be your overlay. And again, you can make this frame any shape you want. I'm just trying to make sure y'all realize the creative possibilities here. You don't have to copy my overlay verbatim. I sure hope you don't have my logo on your stream. That would be weird. But let's get to the export process. We're gonna go to the printer right here, go to Output, and we're gonna select the file format and select FFmpeg video. Then we're gonna go to Encoding, and under Container, change that to WebM. WebM is the video format that allows transparency. Then Video Codec, change that to WebM/VP9. Then if you have audio on your overlay, which I wouldn't personally recommend, you can change the audio codec to Vorbis if you added audio in the video sequence editor, which we did not go over in this tutorial. Then to make sure the background renders out with transparency, you're gonna change RGB to RGBA, red, green, blue, alpha. Then choose a location to put this. I'm gonna put mine right here and call it overlay, and hell yeah. Hit accept. Then, a couple more things to take care of before we render this out is matching the camera to the border as closely as possible, because we don't want all of this extra transparent real estate. That's just going to be extra processor power used. So select the camera, go to the camera settings, and change the orthographic scale to zoom in as much as you can, and then move it around a little bit. But then we're going to want to also go to the printer here. No, it's definitely the render settings. Nope. Wow, yeah, it's under the printer settings. I had to scroll up. We're going to change the X resolution down until we get the aspect ratio matching a bit better. Then take the camera and change the orthographic scale again until it's close to matching. Y'all can get yours closer. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. Then one last thing you want to do is go to the printer tab and realize this is rendering out 1080 pixels high. That is the entire height of your stream. You do not need something that big. I would recommend rendering it out at like maybe 40% or something, or mess with the actual dimensions to something that fits your stream perfectly. But you don't want to make the video file huge because you're just going to scale it down, and that's just extra processor power being used. So once that's done and you have your output path set and you've saved your file, overlay tutorial 3 for me, you can hit Control F12, it'll bring up the window and it will render out your WebM file that you can then drag and drop into OBS to your heart's content. And when you drag it in and go to the video properties, make sure you check that the video loops. And that's pretty much it. Be creative, make something really cool. I can't wait to see what you all come up with. It's a neat technique to make a cool stylized overlay. As always, if you found this tutorial helpful, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button below the video for new content every single week. And if you want to download my files to do whatever you want with, make sure you hop into the Discord, link in the description. Also, come say hey over on Twitch. I'm live every Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday at twitch.tv/oraclefishlive. We genuinely have an incredible community. And if you have any comments, questions, or topics you want me to cover, make sure you leave those in the comments down below. Until next time, my name is Chris Folea. I'm your stream professor. Class is out.